My name is Michael Kira. My Twitter handle is user advocate if you want to say horrible things about me, or say nice things about me. That'd be better. Prefer that. About me, I have two brains. One brain is which one first? A usability specialist, UX specialist, and the other one is a developer. That may sound like an odd thing to say, but it's actually kind of a lot about what this talk is about. So I wanted to put that up front. Now, what do I do with these brains? The UX side is all about listening, mostly listening and observing to users, because I want to know where they are and I don't want to assume anything. And the other side is about speaking to developers or speaking in developerese, and that could be in conversation or in code. It doesn't really matter. And the nice thing about having these two brains is that they do somewhat connect, and I can sort of bring things from one side into the other, back and forth. So when you put those two things together, you get what I call my job title, User Interface Systems Architect. And I've had quite a few years of experience doing development on desktop and started doing web in about 2007. And like pretty much everybody doing PHP, I started off by writing a content management system myself before I realized there was a Drupal. Now, recently, since I'm getting a bit more involved with the Drupal community, I had a chance to do some usability reviews and research projects sponsored by the wonderful people at My Planet. Thank you. So that produced two fairly large documents. And with the last one, this look at what I call outside-in approach to user interface, I kind of bundled that all up into a nice 15-minute little video, which is available on my website, tuag.ca, tuag. So that's in August. I just did one blog post in August. That was it. So I'm going to take a little bit of that, the ending of this, I'm going to play at the end of this session because it kind of wraps up what I'm trying to say. What happened when I published that video was I ran into this guy, Thomas Svensson. He lives in Sweden. And we started resonating really strongly about perspectives on Drupal usability, and we've been talking ever since August. So we ended up doing this. We produced an initiative, a community initiative called the SiteBuilding Usability Initiative, where we want to basically look at all the parts of Drupal and see how they interact and how we can come up with new usability strategies. That little bird up there is called Blinky. He's our mascot. So our focus is not for Drupal 8. It's for Drupal 9, and this is the beginning of our intro to that initiative.
Wouldn't it be nice if building a website in Drupal was as easy as riding a bicycle? There's something deeply satisfying about bicycle riding. As a user experience, it has two important characteristics: continuity and control. Continuity allows users to predict outcomes, and that's what gives them the control. But continuity and control in user experience doesn't just happen. It has to be designed. And the fact is that Drupal's user interfaces are not yet designed for site builders. As a result, the site builder's experience of Drupal's user interfaces is an encounter with fragmented, disconnected parts. It's like channel hopping. And that makes the learning curve for new Drupal site builders notoriously steep. Many give up. Relatively few can make it to the top.
4, 3, 2.
So, what does it mean in the end? If that's the problem with Drupal, where are we heading? Which is our future? Which is our fate? Is it doom or is it glory? Well, that's what we want to talk about. And Dries was talking about that back in Denver. I guess he's always talking about it, but this is where I saw this slide in Denver, where he's talking about how well we do in terms of functionality. That's that big blue one. And how not so well we do in usability. And he's talking about the authoring experience in Drupal, which is a big area of focus for the Drupal 8 round. How many people here have built websites with Drupal. Tons. So what's missing from this slide, I think, is this. Because I also, thanks to Thomas, now see how difficult it is for you guys building sites. And so that's what I want to focus on here. So this is another Dries slide. He talks about the product life cycles and how we can avoid ending up in this garbage heap of things that just didn't make it into the future. What it takes to continue on, and that's innovation. So he really put a lot of emphasis on innovation back in that Denver talk. And that is what he sees Drupal 8 is, a key part of Drupal 8 is to innovate and go on beyond that. The initiative that Thomas and I began is actually focused more up here. It's not Drupal 8, it's Drupal 9, so just so you know. So what does innovation actually look like? Well, I love Seth Godin. I read him every day. I think he's amazing. So I'm just going to plug him here. It has to do with discomfort. He says, discomfort brings engagement and change. That sounds like it may be a place for innovation to happen. Discomfort means you're doing something that others were unlikely to do because they're hiding out in the comfortable zone. He has a nice way of putting those things. I think that's got something to do with it. What I would say is, to innovate, we need to be comfortable with discomfort. If you think about it, I think that's actually true. And I also say, to design great UX, you have to get rid of users' suffering. I basically say usability is the lack of suffering on the part of a user. And I use this picture of barbed wire dancing shoes to illustrate that. So I don't really need to say anything. I just point to that picture. So I want to talk about some tools for innovating, because you can actually use tools. You can certainly increase your chances of doing innovation by using certain techniques. And I want to talk about a couple. So this is an illegal picture of me last week at Google, standing in the Liquid Galaxy thing that they have there, which is really amazing. It's illegal because you're not supposed to take pictures inside the Google building. So don't tell anybody, okay? So I just want to use this Liquid Galaxy because it offers me an interesting analogy to talk about how do we get to innovation. So here's another video. This is what it is. So it's got this joystick thing, and it's like you're in this big virtual helicopter and this massive database of Las Vegas that you can fly around. And basically, what's fun about this, is really fun, I couldn't get me off it, I was on it all night, is you can basically change your perspective on things because you're flying around things. You don't have the weight of your body or the weight of physics. You're just sort of flying around. And yes, it gives you a new perspective, and that's what I like about it. Now, in terms of what we're doing here, we're exploring space in a new way. And it's kind of like, if this was an analogy for a problem, we're kind of surveying the problem area and getting new angles on things. But the thing is, if you want to do innovation, you have to be able to put things together based on the context or the parameters of the problem that you've defined. But if it's familiar ground, if it's familiar territory, you're probably not going to come up with something new. You're going to have to somehow change your perspective vastly, more significantly, in order to bring in new factors that you can use as the basis of your innovation. So this is the other thing you can do with Liquid Galaxy. You can basically, instead of skimming around the surface like this, you can just take a big step back and take a look, because now we want to go to a different place entirely. We want to go, in this case, to a different continent. So he just spoke the commands into this microphone, and he said, take me to the Taj Mahal, and the machine finds its way there. So here's a whole new context. Now, analogously, what it means is you've got new information to consider. In terms of real life, if you were to travel there, you would have new cultural inputs. You'd be able to consider, what things mean in a whole different way. You'd have language differences. You'd have all kinds of new things to work with to get a better overview of what your understandings are anyway. So a technique that I like to use towards innovation is to ask questions. So the road to innovation is paved with better questions. Even if the question is as simple as this, what's this, right? That's what you can imagine your brain is doing as you're flying around this virtual helicopter. It's like, what's this, what's this, what's this? That's what it's doing. It's simply processing that stuff, and you're getting answers visually or however you're taking it in. So it's good to have that kind of question. Keep asking. Now, the thing that I like about that analogy of flying up into space, even though it's kind of like a supersonic helicopter, the analogy of a hot air balloon works better for me here, because the way you get that height is you unload your baggage. The baggage is your assumptions. So if you can imagine you're in a hot air balloon and you're throwing those sandbags off, you get a higher altitude. It's because you're losing your assumptions, and that's how you ask those better questions. That's how you get into those higher perspectives. And I have to say that those questions that you ask to do that are often stupid questions. So I always say when I'm in these kinds of situations with clients, I have to ask you some stupid questions. And they'll always say, there's no such thing as a stupid question. And then when I ask my question, they sort of reconsider. But the point is, stupid questions sound stupid because you're targeting an assumption. And it's also interesting, too, because you can have a group of people around a table and you ask that same stupid question. Everybody says, oh, I know the answer to that. Why are we even asking? Well, give me your answers. And then you get 5 different answers. And then they look at each other and say, really? Right? That's the reason why we ask those questions. So the way it works, in a more technical way, is that this is the local area where you're familiar with things. And this might be your neighborhood, and that's someone else's neighborhood, and that's someone else's neighborhood. And neighborhoods can mean anything. This could be the user. This could be a user interface designer. This could be a developer. What do they have in common? At that level, almost nothing. The way we find out things in common is we have to go up. We have to see, okay, let's compare these two things. What's in common? Let's compare these two things. What's in common? That's basically analysis, isn't it? That's how you get to innovation, ultimately. So we have all those inputs at the local level, and ultimately you can come to a resolution. I like that word resolution. It has the word solution in it for one thing, but it also maps directly to what's going on inside the brain, because it's the same system. You've got all these inputs here, and they go into the nerve cell. If they hit a threshold, they send information up to there, and that takes that information to an entirely different context, which is basically another part of your brain, and that's all it does. That's what your brain does. That's how you think. That's how you are. So it's a very, very well-supported model. So using that technique of basically going up and over, I was able to get from California to my house virtually in Toronto very quickly, and then I could get over to Manchester, where I used to live, in under 10 seconds. If I was doing that at that street view level, I'd still be trying to get over there. I'd still be trying to do it, right? That's the advantage of going up, get that larger context. It's actually very efficient. So it's the same thing with problem solving. If you're going to solve problems at that local level that's familiar and comfortable, it might take you forever. You might never ever solve it because you don't have the right perspective. So here's the space I'm concerned about. How do we bridge that gap? Well, we use the concept of design principles, or at least we should, or at least we can. Design principles are very powerful tools because they offer insights from those high-level perspectives that apply to all that range of problem areas and problem domain. So I want to talk about a few design principles. Well, I actually got my formal education in fine arts, so we used to talk about that kind of stuff. And, libraries have written about these words. It's not something that I'm really that fond of, to be honest. But architecture has the same kind of sort of approach. They have principles. Again, it's very subjective in those areas, in those arts areas. Maybe architecture is a bit more scientific. But what I was dissatisfied with art school in that sense. I ended up just reducing it all down to 2 words. Art for me became this, minimal redundancy. That's all it is. And that's probably another topic for discussion. But basically, it's a balance between form and content. There's nothing that's wasted. And everything is expressed. So that little formula sort of got me across a boundary into software because I realized the same principles applied there too. Now, this is something, the way design principles are articulated in software is a little bit more verbose. And I can actually understand that a little better because it's more specific. So separation of concern, single responsibility, they mean things to software architects. And I would argue that minimal redundancy applies to all those things as well. And the same thing can apply to UX design. Now, these are ones that I would recommend for Drupal. And these are new things. These are things that come from a foreign world that Drupal, I think, for the most part, is not used to. Because that's not how we do things right now. Okay, I'm going to explain, but I don't have time here to talk about all of them, so I'm just going to talk at the top one, role-oriented design, because I think it's actually the first one to go to, because it's the gateway to all the others. And see, the last one is what I had in my other video, continuity and control. That's where I'd like to get in terms of setting the bar for usability. And the whole point behind the principles is that it helps guide where things end up. It's sort of an underlying kind of force that helps things fall into the right place. And that's what we need in a community like this, because we've got lots of inputs from lots of people, and you need to have some kind of guidance for everybody so that they all end up in a coordinated kind of effort. That's the advantage of design principles. So role-oriented design, the problem with that is, what do we mean by role? And it's a problem that it's just simply there. And I'm just going to, go into it because I have to. But basically, the way that we define the word role in Drupal, it comes from this world, from this brain, the developer brain. And it's defined as a set of permissions. What that means, basically, if you're not technical, it just simply means it's like having a set of keys. So a set of keys allows you to go to certain places. It opens the doors. So it's basically a set of permissions. That's what that is. From the user experience world, we use the word differently. And I'm pronouncing the word with a capital R. I don't know if you can tell that when I say role. It's capital R role. But the role for usability is a set of tasks. So it boils down to this. It boils down to, it's not what I can do, what I have permission to do, but what, in fact, do I want to do right now? It's a decision I'm going to make as a user. I'm going to do this, done. I'm going to do this, done. Okay, that's the division. That's the difference. Permissions never change. The tasks always change within any given user scenario. So permissions about access, and role, as I define it, is about the task objective that a user has at any given time. And that has a lot to do with what you need to put on the screen to help them do it. That's the nice connection to usability design. So Thomas put this blog up in the summertime, around the same time that I put my video up. And I noticed that he said this, understanding roles is important. I don't hear that very often, so when I read that, I thought, who is this person? And so we tweeted each other, and we got a hold of each other. And he has this diagram on that same blog post where he describes how the site builder is right in the middle of a whole bunch of roles. We've got what I would call upstream roles, the core developer, and downstream roles, which are content editors and users and so on. And the site builder is right there in the middle. So we basically theorized that if we can solve the problem for the site builder in terms of making user interfaces simple, we would have to get such sufficiently high-level view of the problem that we could probably come up with design principles that would apply for all the other roles as well. So it's a strategic move that we're talking about here. Use the plight of the site builder, as it were, to solve problems for everybody else. That's why we chose that as the basis for the initiative. So here's something that a site builder typically does. They're going to start perhaps by building a content type, so they have a certain user interface to do that. Great, we've all seen this. Here we're just going to add a field, we're going to add a taxonomy field, and there it is. And then all of a sudden we end up in a place like this. And this is the problem. We just sort of crossed a boundary someplace. I'm just going to play you the sound of suffering.
That is what we need the better formats module for.
Okay.
So if you go to let's see, I believe it's in let's see here. Let's see. Just trying to find where it is actually.
Okay, so that's the point. Thomas has got over 4 years experience doing this, right? And it still happens for him. Where is that stuff? So the point is, he had to leave that area where he was defining a content type, and he had to go someplace else because he needed something in the content type. But he couldn't remember where that something else was. So he ends up lost in very nice drop-down menus, and it's hard, I think, to live without them. But you still have to find the stuff. You're still, in a way, kind of going street level, street view, through the planet, looking for that thing. Where is it? And there is no higher view for that. So this is theoretically what we want. We have a set of tasks that come with the content type interface, 1, 2, 3. Good, done, except we need some other stuff in there because contributed modules are throwing things in. We have to go find those things, and we have to basically push them back into that content type definition. It's a push model. And so we have the problem of finding things and then connecting things mentally. That's all the learning curve. It's all there. Really what we'd like is something like this. We do 1, 2, 3, and then, well, let's do X, Y, Z while we're at it. Right? In the same context of that one task objective, I'm building a content type. Give me the things that I can do. So we put a box around that. And then we call it, that's my recipe for building a content type that I'm calling blog. And so I'm basically defining a kind of a unit. I'm defining a data object that's going to be useful down the road. And it's useful here because then we can basically pass it along to a content editor. So we, on the left side, the role of site builder is about definition of this entity, this data type, and then there's a usage context where it's simply available for someone that doesn't want to do site building to simply write a blog post. And that's a natural relationship. But the point is, there's a separation of definition and usage. If you conflate those things, it becomes confusing because it means that all the tools that the site builder has on screen to do his or her things, and all the tools that the content manager would want to do his or her thing would end up being in one place, and then they have to start ignoring things and looking for the things that they want. And maybe you have all seen that happen, and maybe you've seen that happen in Drupal. But I'm saying it happens because we don't separate definition and usage well enough in some cases. So there's this implied boundary between those kinds of usage contexts, and that is what I call a role switch. At some point, either it's a different person or the same person put on a different hat and decided they have a different task objective. That's taking on a different role. The role that I mean, not the permissions. Permissions don't necessarily change if it's one user. They won't change if it's one user. So we have role switches all over the place. This one, view, edit, devel, those are role switches. My point is that we need to be conscious that that's what they are. They're not just sort of convenient links. It's actually a fundamental, really important thing that's going on here. It's about what's your task objective as a user. And when we provide things like this, we're so far unconsciously sort of supporting roles. I'm saying we need to do that more consciously. And then we'll be able to accelerate from that higher level perspective much more quickly into a better future. So here's an example of using that system of analysis to reimagine what Drupal could look like. And I call this kind of an outside-in perspective. So I'm stealing things from the Spark initiative here, liberally. So basically, it just constitutes two things. A bar across here, which I'm calling a taskbar, and it has buttons on it that simply indicate different potential task objectives. So it says manage pages, manage layouts, manage components, manage, it doesn't really, it's just a set of things that people could potentially be trying to do as the main task objective. And they work in concert with this. So when you click on one of these things, this toolbox at the left provides the tools you need to get that task objective met. It's just a very simple organization principle. And it really, it doesn't come so much from the web world, but it comes more from a desktop environment, which is where I can actually come from. So that's where I borrowed the idea. And I think it's appropriate to do that because the web is becoming more application oriented, especially for something like Drupal doing this. So 2 simple mechanisms, and we can do all kinds of things with it. By simply changing the context of our objective, we can get different sets of tools. And here, imagining putting content in a certain way, using this toolbox in a certain way. And there's some more animated illustration of this on that video in August, so if you want to check it out. And so you end up with something like this. You've got content in there. And one of the nice things about this is we're actually starting to look at something here where there's a separation between the tools that are needed to build up this content and the actual page, the representation of the page. So I really like the idea of not disrupting that page. So I'm not a really big believer in a lot of tools localized here. I like to get them out of the way. And that's debatable, but that's just where I come from. So the point is that you end up with that principle, that way of doing things. You end up building relationships between different fields of data. Now, in the Drupal 8 world, you would call these fields perhaps blocks, right? And I actually have a slightly different word for it. I call them components, which go in fetch blocks. But that's just a kind of a semantic thing. But I use that concept to sort of approach the whole point of the whole business of site building. And there's one more thing I want to touch on here, though, that I also believe from an outside-in perspective, it's good to start with building pages. And that could come from, okay, James had said, after we install Drupal, what do we get? Well, not a lot of useful things for most people. So I'm saying more articulation there. These groups of task objectives, groups of roles, give you kinds of things that you might resonate with. So there's page management, there's site component things, and then there's content management. You might come in from any one of those doors. Personally, I think the last thing you're going to do after you've installed Drupal is add content. To me, in my experience building sites, that seems to be the last thing that ever arrives, is the content. What does come first is a notion of an information architecture, where we want our pages. So that's something I would start as building a site. Let's build out the information architecture. And then we've got places to put things. And then we can have conversations with clients about that. Where do you want this stuff? So that's what the principle is here. So I'm just going to show a little 3-minute video to show how this kind of wraps up. And it's the ending to that August video. And then maybe, and the other thing too is I've set it to music because I like setting things to music, but music changes the way you see things. And I want you to just ride with it and just sort of, it's an imagination exercise. It's not a technical readout. Okay, so just enjoy it. Oh, I'm lying. That's not the video. That's another slide. So yeah, the whole idea of reuse is really important. So that stuff that I'm talking about here is a mechanism that's leading towards the notion of reuse. Sorry, I'm getting my video. I know we're running out of time. And I also have this thing, which is I've developed this notation for representing contextual relationships that we could use to describe how things fit together in a page archetype. Okay, so that's what this is, and I'm just going to show you in the video how we put that to use.
Okay, it's time to wake up that left brain again and do a little bit of logical thinking. I'm going to think a bit about component patterns, how we can arrange components in ways that can be reusable. So a component is really a special kind of block, a super block, and it brings content into a layout, into a region, and it does it on the basis of 3 different kinds of context. So there's 3 different kinds of components. So contextual information can come from the path, from the URL, as an argument, or from a fixed setting, that would be, say, the node ID. A component can also retrieve content through a dynamic mechanism like a view, and it can take an argument, feed it to the view, and pull up a particular node. And when it gets really interesting is when it can actually pull information from another component through a relationship. So comments coming from a particular node can be shown in the same region or in any region, and it's always related. Whatever the node that is, the right comments will show up because of that relationship. And there can be more than one relationship to a particular component. So many things can be tied to one parent. So using this kind of relationship connection, you can tie different components together across regions. And you could have one or more hierarchies of connection like this coming from parents, and if you change the configuration of that parent, all of the derived content underneath it will change. So these relationships can be structured into reusable patterns, all driven by those key parent components. So by giving them descriptive names and saving them, we can bring them back for use again in different ways. Now, where would we use such things? Well, in a page management context, we can paint the information architecture with these structures. So rather than push content into an information architecture through a node form using a menu or an alias, we can actually pull the content we want into the page location that we want it at through the use of a form like this, which comes up if that page is deemed to be empty with no content. It comes up automatically and says, you need this kind of content here, which would you like? And you put it in. Not much training is required for that.
Yeah, so that's what I'm seeing as a role-based outside-in way of looking at Drupal. So that's a concept that I'm referring to as inductive workflow. So the idea is that you don't even though I'm saying you've got definition usage, you could say that you define a page and you're going to use it when you want to put content in the page. You can do that, sure. You can also reverse it a little bit as well. You can say define the page and go there, and it can basically say, oh, you said you wanted to have a blog post there, but you don't have a blog post there. Can you please do one for me? Right? So it kind of eggs the user on and saying, you know, can you fill that in? Can you fill in that blank for me? So we can't do that with Drupal right now because you can't have that emptiness. You can't have like that null thing there. But I'm thinking you can. It's a very powerful concept to do that. You can basically prescribe what should be there, because I really believe that fits naturally the way you actually think about the process. You think about building out the site. Well, I think I want one of these here, and I think I want one of those there. Right? But you don't have them ready yet, especially when it comes to content. I would love to be playing in Contrib in Drupal 8 to prototype some of this stuff, absolutely. And I was really happy to learn last night that all that amazing architecture we've got in Whiskey is accessible for this kind of experimentation. And, you know, I'm happy about that. I think you said a lot of really interesting things. You talk about a content strategy, you talk about abstract content, you talk about interacting with clients, and that's exactly the motivation for this investigation. In fact, it comes from the site that I used was a My Planet project with the Downsview website, and the process of dealing with that client was all about content strategy. It was all about them knowing what they wanted, but you know, it wasn't there yet. And we ended up using spreadsheets and so on to capture those requirements. What I'm saying is that could actually be the workflow. You can actually, if you don't have the content yet, you at least have an idea what the content should be, put that in the database. And then use that to pass messages through the team, across the team to the client, and just integrate it right into the entire site building process. I think that's actually very exciting because I think it can be very intuitive. Well, that's good to hear. And the other keyword I got there was what do we need for the business? And I didn't mention this, but my definition of page, as I was describing the page manager there, a page is basically a unit of business intent. It's a location at which certain business intent can be carried out. And that's how clients are thinking. And that could be the instructions essentially for a site builder.